stopped before because I was rudely interrupted. I left off with Romans 15:15. It says, "But on some points I have written to you very boldly by way of reminder. By way of reminder, I've written to you very bold points." For a person such as myself, that reminder of my childhood is bold. It's, for me, written on stone, carved out of memory, for me to see later and recall. Because a lot of things that young you may not remember or even recall. I've known of Christ, Jesus, for years. Since I was a young child, we used to go to church and, sing in the choir, and then we stopped going for a long time. Then we started going back and then stopped. It was an on and off process. It wasn't until I was an adult and married and had given birth to my third child but only had 2 children living that God called me to him. And it wasn't, one of those callings to where I needed to be in the pulpit and preaching and, running a church or leading or anything like that. Not to say that my calling is any different than others. I literally have been in and out of the world. And it was at that point when I was driving by 34th Street Church of God, which was my grandmother's church before she died. And there's this big cross that sits up on a wall behind Pastor Scott's pulpit. And he's been the pastor since I was a little girl. And I was going through a time of being diagnosed with possibly having ovarian cancer. And it was literally when I heard God say, "Come here in this place and you'll find a home and peace." Because at that point in my life wasn't my own. It was crazy, My marriage seemed to be a fraud, a scam, or was off filtered completely from what I thought marriage was. I got married when I didn't or should not have gotten married. It was crazy. It was real crazy. And then, waking up to vomiting and, losing your bodily fluids and bleeding and, someone saying, "We think you have cancer. We're going to send you through a series of tests," and taking these different pills for pain, not being able to work, just so much. It was a lot. And I remember calling my husband and telling him that Wednesday I wanted to go to church. And we went to a Wednesday night service. And it was like instantly, as I walked into the sanctuary, I was at peace. I didn't worry. And it was the first time for that for me. As we move into Romans 15, it goes on to say, because of the grace given to me by God, that goes along with 1 Corinthians. For by the grace of God, I am what I am. And then Romans 15 kind of wraps it up for me. And I know it's bouncing around in the Bible, but this is how I make the Bible relevant in my life and the lives around me. I insert, different parts of the Bible that are meaningful beyond measure to my life and where I am, and I think a lot of people may do that. But basically Paul is saying, because the grace of God given unto me by God, I am sitting here today giving this erratic sermon that's way off kilter from what I'm used to seeing. Because honestly, I've never seen a sermon given like this besides the ones I've watched online of people speaking. This is something that has always been, near and dear to my heart, because it was the grace of God that kept me, that gave me peace. God has grace for all of our lives, and it may not be, fancy cars, big houses, $1 million in the bank, or even a few hundred in the bank, but He has grace for all of us. On that day, 20 years ago, God was making my stepping stones. And as you said before, I believe you're in Germany, or some story you heard about Germany about stepping stones, and you were saying about the people that died and their names were carved on stones. It made me think back to that, because I'll always remember 20 years ago, those were my stepping stones. And, God was putting blocks for me to walk on and be able to climb a little bit higher and rise up against what I was yet to go through. And I didn't even know it. So, I say that to say that many people don't realize when God is walking in their lives and the things that He's doing based on variations of things that He's done in their past. Had I known then what I know now, as many would say, oh wow, it would be gigantic. Even then, I couldn't receive it. I didn't have the ability to understand it. It wasn't until I had been rebellious against my aunt as a teenager and grieved my firstborn son Isaiah's death, lost what I thought was love, had been abused sexually, physically, mentally, homeless, and even outright disgusted with myself, that I realized that I was going through to come out on the other side, and to now be married with 5 children, my 2 stepchildren and my 3 children. So yeah, that's 5, my babies, that I found that who I was raised to be and who I grew into be is who I am. And that I am what I am. And it was by the grace of God that I have this amount of courage to even sit here and do this, because I would have never done this before. It's the understanding that grace is not material things or worldly possessions or even Beyonce fame or Dietrich Haddon fame. Your faith in God sometimes may not even be enough of a mustard seed. You may not have enough faith at all, but it is my belief that God's grace is given at birth, even in this world. His grace is what has brought Him to me. He spared my life through childbirth, through sexual assault as a child, through violent abuse. He even gave me peace when there was no life within me, when I thought that I wanted to leave this world. God saw differently and put me in a position to live, to want more, to be better. God did that for me. He had His grace and His mercy upon my life was that for me. God gave me someone to teach me how to make a way out of no way. And Lord knows I've made so many ways out of no way in the last 7 years, the last 20 years, than I think some people at 50 probably would have never even considered. 20 years ago, I didn't know what faith was or what it meant. I just know whatever it took my aunt to make a way for my life and others, she had to have faith, and her faith in God gave my life grace from God. I feel that the faith that she had in having a plan and trusting God and praying and reading His Word was giving me stepping stones to have that for me. You see, your grace can be attached to someone else's without even knowing it. You may not even ever realize it, but it can be. It takes a moment in God's headspace for you to see that His grace is not in vain. And through all that you've endured, it wasn't you saving yourself from this bad relationship or veering off the road from hitting that other car or getting out of the house in time when it caught on fire or putting that needle down when you wanted to shoot up or drinking that last cup of liquor or whatever it is. It's not you that's saving you, but it's God's saving grace saving you. Because in that moment when you realize that you're worth more than that present situation and that present circumstance, and you can do better, is when things become enormous. And you, with faith in God and beginning to know who God is, you accept the reality that somebody prayed for you. And it may not have been your mother, your brother, your sister, your cousin. It could have been anybody, someone in passing that felt that heavy load on you as you passed them or saw how you were. Somebody prayed for you. And God had enough love in His heart for you that He wanted to save you and bring you into His kingdom so that you could tell your story through being transparent and save someone else's life. And it's, God's grace, His grace and mercy, that you are what you are. It's, God's faith, His plan, His love, His kindness, His peace that makes us who we are. And it's exactly what 1 Corinthians 15:10 says. By the grace of God, I am what I am. And His grace towards me was not in vain. And once I accepted and I wanted to live for God, I wanted to make sure that He didn't waste His grace on me and that His mercy was enormous enough for me to pass on and live out life. So just the opportunity to even share my story with you, Dr. Varner, or whoever else that may see this, is different. It's very off-centered. It's not in order. It's not, your traditional sermon, but everyone doesn't share God the same. We may all get the same understanding of who He is, but our experience in Christ is different. And even as I give this sermon and when I had the brief break in between, I had to realize that we all have a different drum that we beat, but we all love the same God, and we should all be working towards the same point in life. And not everyone is going to understand who you are, where you come from, and what you're doing with yourself. They just know that you're you. But it's you understanding and me understanding that it is by God's grace that we are who we are today. And for the many days to come forward, and in God's prayer, and as my aunt and the elders always say, the Lord's will, that tomorrow is promised to us, because we're always told it's not. But it's the Lord's will that it is promised to us that we have another opportunity to get it right, or the next 30 seconds to get it right. So with that being said, I'm going to say thank you for this experience and allow me to see things differently. The service in Novatus was grateful. It helped me see things clearly that, I do have a mission and that there is something in this world for me to do. I just have to find my way in doing it. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for your peace that you shared with me when we first met in class. I'm grateful for that as well.